Hey y'all, let's talk reel-to-reel tapes. And I've dove down that rabbit hole, and for now I've mostly been working with this Akai GX4000D that I bought, and it was sold as a refurbished deck that had been clean and professionally tuned up, and it really does seem to work good. And I feel like that it was a legit, kind of adjusted, tuned up tape deck, because pre-recorded tapes like this stuff sound great on it. And if the reproducer part of it is working correctly, and then the recorded tapes also sound good, then I feel like you've got a deck that's working like it's supposed to. So I'm going to talk about some of my experience with different tapes and what you should look out for, especially with a more consumer-oriented deck. And then I'll talk more about that when I get into where I'm at with my Tascam 32. So let's talk about these 7-inch machines to start with. Most of these are consumer-oriented. They're going to be 4-track decks. I think maybe somebody made a 2-track deck, but that's a super rarity. 99.9% of these 7-inch decks are going to be a 4-track, 2-channel. And what that means is that there's 4 tracks recorded on the 1/4-inch tape. So it's divided up into 25%. There's a little gap between the channels so that you don't have crosstalk. But it records 2 tracks in this direction, stereo, and then 2 tracks this direction. And if you were recording mono, you could do 4 mono recordings back and forth across the tape. But we're mostly going to be doing stereo, so there we go. You're going to listen through one side, flip the tapes over, listen to the other side. Probably used to that from your cassettes. So what are we looking at as far as good performance? Honestly, I don't think messing with those 3 3/4 inch per second tapes are worth messing with. I've bought a couple of them, and they just don't sound that great. They sound okay, but the vinyl's going to sound better. You're not leaping past a vinyl setup listening to those low-speed tapes. And part of the problem becomes the tape in the recording process requires a high-frequency magnetic bias to be put on the tape at the same time it's being recorded. And that's exciting the, magnetized particles on the tape itself so that the tape can be recorded. And you can read more about that, and the bias does seem to be an important thing to dial in with the tape you're using, and we'll get into that in a minute. But at the slower speeds, what's going on is this bias is erasing some of the high frequency information before the tape can get out of this magnetic bias field, because it's running so slow. And the slower the tape's running across the record head, the more information gets erased right after it's recorded. And that's just part of the deal with tape. Also, you get more hiss and noise at the slower speeds, and the only reason they do it is so that they can put less tape on the reel. And if you look at these pre-recorded tapes, like here's a 7.5-inch one, it doesn't even fill up half the reel, and it's got a big center in it, bigger than like a normal reel would be. Like if you look at these blank ones, they have the center part smaller, and see how much more tape's on it? So yeah, that's the only reason that they ran those lower speeds, was just being cheap and trying to put out a pre-recorded tape that used less actual tape so there was more profit. And this is one thing I've learned too, is when you buy a new tape, it comes just packed to the brim with tape. And I'm sure they do it so you don't feel like you're getting cheated. But, man, it's hard to keep it to even stay on there to get it back in the box. It's like, anyway. So let's talk about the different kinds of tapes that you can buy, the blank ones. Like, here's pre-recorded ones. They're very expensive. Some of them are certain titles are stupid expensive just because they're rare. And stuff like this, I think I paid $15 for this. I bought a nice copy of Carole King Tapestry, and it was about $75 for a pre-recorded 7.5 IPS. And then one of my favorite albums, Santana Abraxas, I found it on a reel-to-reel tape, and it was about the same $75 price, but it was at 3 3/4 speed tape, and it just kind of sounded mediocre. I mean, it wasn't anything to get excited about. So if you're going to do this stuff with these 7-inch decks, run them at 7.5 speed. So, that said, as far as blank tape, I've tried several different brands. And the first one I tried was some of these ATR magnetics. And I was starting out with the long play version of all of these tapes, thinking, oh, well, I want to have more playtime. But I think that's a mistake. The standard tapes are 1,250 feet on a 7-inch reel, and it plays like 33 minutes, which is enough for an album side. The long play ones are like 45 or 48 minutes for 1,800 feet, but the problem is it's not long enough to get the whole album on one side. So you're still having to flip the tape over to hear the whole album, and then there's not enough left on the other side to record another whole album. And so, yeah, you end up, basically kind of mixtaping, and that's not what I want to do. I don't want to if you're into making mixtapes, maybe that would work. But the other disadvantage, though, is it's thinner tape. It's 1 mil instead of 1.5. And there's less magnetic material put on the tape, and the tape will break easier, but mainly there's not as much magnetic material on the thinner tape, and you're just not going to get the sound quality. Now, the first tape that I used was this stuff, this RTM, was it the LPR 35? I mean, they sell this RTM tape on Amazon, which is cool too, and it's not priced horrible. Anyway, this was the first one I played with, and with the deck I have, it has like the erase head, then the record head, and then the play head. And so you can, in real time, listen to what you're recording. So you can, hear it while it's being recorded to make sure that it's sounding good and it's not all distorted or doing something weird. And I know that recording tape hot is going to sound better. And by doing that, you get better signal to noise ratio and all that kind of stuff, but you don't want to, get into clipping on the tape where it's just, distortion. And some tape formulations you can record hotter on before they start clipping. And with this RTM tape, with the machine I have, and the way the factory bias is set, you can record these pretty hot. You can actually have it playing back hotter than the source going in. So when you switch between the source and the tape's a little louder than the source. And it sounds really good. And obviously you can turn it up to where it starts sounding distorted, not good, but you can get a few dBs of extra hotness on the tape with that Akai deck using this tape. So if you look up on their website of their different tapes, this is the standard thickness tape, and according to them, you can record it even hotter. And then they have some special tape that's like plus 6 dBs or plus 9 dBs that has even more headroom on it than these standard ones do. But those get really expensive. So then I bought one of these. These are made in the U.S. This tape's made in France. And I wanted to support the United States manufactured stuff. Manufacturer like me, small manufacturer. I think they're up in Philadelphia. So I tried this tape. And I don't know whether it's the way the bias is set on my machine, which is fixed. I mean, it takes an act of God to get in there and change the bias on these consumer decks. I could not record this anywhere near as hot as this without it getting distorted. I couldn't even get it to the same output level as the source without it starting to sound distorted. And so, unfortunately, at least for my consumer machine, not going to be using any more of this long playing stuff from ATR. I do want to try their regular thickness tape and see if it's just the long play tape that has that limitation that doesn't want to work well on a machine. Let me just put it that way. And so I'll report back later how that works, but for now I'm going to be buying this RTM tape, and I do have a couple of more of the long play ones, but I think I'm going to start buying the regular length, because then you get like an album side on each side of the tape, and that just makes more sense than the longer play one, especially if it's got higher sound quality levels. Now, I did buy some of this older Maxwell UD tape, which this is no longer being manufactured, but this, I've been told, is really good, high output, low noise tape. It says it right on the front. And so I think the deal with it is you can put a lot hotter signal on this tape than you can, like, let's say, this tape. So if you're getting into this, there is going to be some experimentation, and you're going to have to figure out what tape works well with your machine, and kind of figure out if you want to use the long play ones or you want to run the standard play ones. And like, this is one of my Carole King tapes that I bought, and man, this sounds really good. And I know this isn't like the 15 IPS 2-track stuff, but these really do sound good. These 7.5 IPS 4-track tapes, they're worth buying if it's something that you enjoy. So that's kind of it on the 7-inch deck of where I'm at right now. So an update on my Tascam 32. Now on these professional decks like that, there's like a zillion adjustments inside it. There's a bias adjustment, there's a bias frequency, there's a reproducer level, reproducer EQ, then there's the record level, record EQ, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff. This is what I bought this analog meter over here for, that reads in dBs to calibrate the reproducer level. And then I've also had to buy a couple of test tapes at both 7.5 and 15 IPS. They're going to have two different tapes, and those tapes are hard to find. There's some folks on eBay selling them. I don't know, I just was a little skeptical on the quality of those. So I'm buying some. I'll put the name of those up here. I can't remember the acronym, but they're the ones that have been in business forever making these alignment tapes. And then I need to make sure the azimuth on the heads is set right, and then get the levels all set, get the EQs set. I'm going to pull the boards out and clean all that up. It's got a little bit of mechanical issues that I want to deal with, but the head's look in really good shape. And that's the main thing. If you're buying one of these machines, make sure the heads aren't worn out. And you can visibly see like the tape path groove in the head if the heads are worn out. I went and looked at a couple of them. People saw at flea markets and stuff, and they were junk. And so be careful with that. You want to get some that have heads that aren't just trashed from use. And especially the higher quality tape machines, a lot of them ended up in studios. And especially if you see it's got rack mounts on it, it was probably used in a studio and not in somebody's home. And those are that's just kind of a red flag to really look at the heads close if it's got the rack mount flanges on the tape deck, because it probably came out of a studio. So anyway, the Tascam 32 is what will play back these new tapes that are being made. And then I've got to dive into the whole NAB versus IEC EQ setup on them, and I got to figure all that out. Obviously, a setup machine is going to be expensive. I think I told you we went to the local audio club and they had this Studer machine that was all refreshed and set up 2-track to run these new tapes, and he said he paid 10 grand for it. And so those higher quality machines have gotten expensive again because people are making media to play on them, and people have heard how good they are, and I think they're just going to get more expensive. And so I feel like even though my Tascam 32 has got some alignment and adjustment issues, mechanically it works and all the motors are good and all that stuff, and I got it for $800, so I feel like I got a pretty good deal on it. But you know, it's going to take a lot of work to get it where I want it to be. So anyway, that's kind of where this whole reel-to-reel stuff's been. I know you saw me kind of getting into it, and I've still got a Akai 4000D that's got the metal heads. The one I'm listening to now has glass heads. The earlier one has metal heads, which are supposed to sound like more organic or something. I don't know. We'll see. But it's got issues with noisy transistors, so I'm going to have to rebuild all the boards in it. And mechanically, it's in good shape. But yeah, electronically, it's going to need some work. So we'll be doing some solid state repairs. Doing that, it probably needs to be recapped and all that stuff too. And then I've got the old M8 crossfield bias machine that's all tubes. And yeah, that's another project. Another project. I got projects everywhere. Got projects all behind me. So yeah. Hopefully we'll have time to deal with all this stuff. But for now, just this informational video about 7-inch tapes. And if you're interested in playing with one of those machines, you can get a nice refurbed one for $500 or $600. And the ones that are lower than that are kind of hit and miss. You might get a good one. You might get one that's got issues. So be warned on that. You're probably better off as a listener to buy a deck that somebody's gone through. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters and other folks that make donations at my website and otherwise help support the channel. And until the next video, have a nice day.